Yesterday the British Parliament devoted hours of its time to debate what? To debate the chants made by a rapper at a music festival against Israeli terrorists called the IDF. The woman who led the outrage was none other than the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandi, whose anger was so intense that even an IDF member would be put to shame. Nandi said that the call for the death of the IDF meant that Bob Vylan had called for the death of Jewish people and therefore the erasure of the settler colony of Israel.
Members of Parliament will have seen, as I have, the appalling and unacceptable scenes at Glastonbury on Saturday, where chants of death to the IDF and river to the sea, amongst others, were broadcast to the nation. I've been in touch with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, as to whether there has been any criminal offence committed. The House will know that decisions relating to specific cases are an operational matter for the police. Avon and Somerset Police have confirmed that video evidence is being assessed by officers to determine whether any offences may have been committed. They have just announced in the last few minutes that this has now taken the form of a criminal investigation. So, as I hope members will appreciate, it therefore would not be appropriate for the government to comment on an ongoing investigation at this stage. But let me be clear that this government will not tolerate anti-Semitism. It has no place in our society. It is a poison and a cancer that must be rooted out, and we will be relentless in our work to do so. This government works closely with the police and with community partners to ensure the safety and security of Jewish communities, and we will continue to do so following the enormous impact that these events have had on them over the weekend. There was something particularly pernicious about chanting death to the IDF. Many colleagues will know that in Israel there is a conscription model. Every young person is required to serve in the IDF, which means that chanting death to the IDF is equivalent to calling for the death of every single Israeli Jew. That is one of the many reasons why we take this so seriously and why it cannot be argued that this did not cross a very dangerous line.
What went largely unnoticed was Lisa Nandi's astonishing claim, an audacious conflation of barbaric IDF terrorists with Jews around the world. What she effectively established was that the future IDF's barbarism should be blamed on the Jewish community around the world. Is that how followers of Judaism like to identify themselves in the future? If not, what are they doing to stop such nonsensical rhetoric to be peddled by compromised politicians just because they have to serve the interest of a corrupt Israeli lobby? And so that the Labour backbencher MPs and constituents aren't alienated by her support for a bunch of genocidal maniacs, she claimed that she had always been a friend of Palestine.
As somebody who's been associated with the Palestinian cause for nearly 2 decades now and has consistently spoken out about the treatment by the Israeli government, not just of people in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well, it is entirely possible to stand up for the Palestinians and never ever stray into anti-Semitism.
Lisa Nandi can fool members of her constituency and even fellow Labour MPs. But we haven't forgotten her track record of what kind of a friend of Palestine she has been. This was her in the immediate aftermath of the Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza, when Israeli war criminal Yoav Gallant had famously announced the cutting of food and water and electricity into Gaza. Such was her concern for the people of Palestine that she simply couldn't find anything objectionable in Israel's decision to cut off water and electricity into Gaza, otherwise considered to be a war crime under international law.
Do you think Israel breached international law by cutting off water and power supplies?
Look,
I think this is an extraordinarily complex and fast-moving situation. There are 200 hostages.
And what's the answer to the question?
Well, look, Israel has the right to self-defence, and it has a duty to secure the release of its hostages.
Sure. But my question was,
ensure that international law is upheld.
Right, and so my question is, do you think Israel has breached international humanitarian law by cutting off water and fuel supplies?
Well, in the last 24 hours, we've seen water, medicine and food enter Gaza. It is in very limited supply at the moment, but I am hopeful that we'll be able to amplify and scale up those efforts urgently. There is a very small window in which an Israeli government that is responding to fear and pain in Israel, and the Egyptian government as well, who have serious concerns about the opening of the Rafah crossing, may be persuaded, with the help of the United States and others, to not just allow aid into Gaza, but to allow safe passage through Gaza to reach people in the north. And that's what we've got to focus on.
I am going to ask the question again. Do you think Israel breached international law by cutting off power and water supplies?
Look, I'm not going to sit in your studio and grandstand and tell you that I'm going to make big pronouncements about what Israel is and isn't doing in what is a very complex, difficult situation where, as you know, a number of your panel have just recognised, Israel is still having rockets fired against its own people from a prescribed terrorist organisation, and where you've got 200 hostages sitting in basements in Gaza who haven't yet been released. What we've got to ensure is that international law is upheld. That's why the 20 trucks that went into Gaza were very important yesterday, but not sufficient. And that's why all of our efforts are focused on keeping that window open, keeping that crossing open, and scaling up those efforts urgently. There is a humanitarian catastrophe looming for people in Gaza, and that's where we've got to focus.
Bob Vylan has truly unmasked the politicians of the so-called civilized West and their dirty nexus with a racist, apartheid and genocidal regime of Israel. No sane mind is going to take these compromised politicians seriously anymore, particularly on their lecture on morality and civil rights. This woman and many from her ilk had a problem in a chant made by a rapper and therefore devoted hours debating it in the parliament, but they could not find even a fraction of that time to express their shock on the mass starvation of 2 million people and brutal slaughtering of children and babies by the same IDF that they were defending. As I speak, the genocidal regime of Israel has killed dozens more Palestinians in Gaza and burned their homes in the occupied West Bank. But this depravity appears to be fair game with these shameless politicians. Frankly speaking, politicians from the West aren't even ashamed about their support for the modern-day Holocaust in Gaza. A rapper says death to the IDF, the police swings into action. A criminal investigation is launched. The media goes berserk for days, and the political class loses its sleep. Worse, across the Atlantic, the US administration revokes visa, citing the rapper's support for terrorism. His shows in the US scheduled for October gets cancelled, and his talent agency drops him as a client. That's the power of the Israeli lobby. At the same time, the same US administration, headed by a convicted felon, is busy preparing to welcome a war criminal called Benjamin Netanyahu. His crime is so despicable that the International Criminal Court had to issue an arrest warrant against him. So the US government has a problem in allowing a rapper to enter the country because of mere utterances, but is absolutely fine in welcoming a convicted war criminal despite his record of having killed hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed the whole of Gaza. And Trump has the audacity to sell it as some kind of positive news as he promises a ceasefire in Gaza within a week.
How firm are you going to be with Netanyahu about ending the war in Gaza?
Very firm, very firm. But he wants it too, I will tell you. He's coming here next week. He wants to end it too. We had a tremendous success with Iran. They won't have me. Somebody said, when are you going to sign? I said, sign? They are so bombed out. Did you see the report issued this morning? The place was decimated. It'll be years before anybody even gets down there. So that's not a priority, but we'll have a report and we'll have whatever we want. We'll get whatever we want from Iran. And I think, and I hope they want to have a good country. You know, they have massive sanctions right now, biting sanctions. It's going to be very hard for them to do anything with those sanctions. And I look forward to maybe there'll be a time when we get along with them and they can rebuild their country.
Is there a point where you tell Netanyahu, like, you gotta end this now, you gotta strike a deal?
Well, he wants to. I can tell you he wants to, and I think we'll have it. I think we'll have a deal next week.
Most ordinary folks in the West get it and aren't hesitant to highlight the real face of the IDF. Why can't the ruling class in the West get this simple fact?
Well, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that vast swathes of the global South would see the IDF as akin to a terrorist organization. They would see Israel as illegally occupying Palestine. And many people in the West now are coming round to the realization of just how brutal, just how oppressive the settler colonial project of Zionism is in Palestine. And I think to demonize the resistance is getting harder and harder for the Israelis when on our phones every day we are seeing the brutal effects of the Israeli war machine all over the region.
The US is cooked, so is the UK, which ironically is ruled by a bunch of so-called liberals. But their actions are worse than right-wing fascists. The damage these clowns are causing to their countries would be irreparable, and this would continue to haunt generations to come. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.